So I wanted to welcome everyone today. My name is Dennis Cooley. I am the director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute, which hosts the Science, Religion, Lunch seminar. Today we have an interesting speaker. He's one of my graduate students, so I want everybody to be kind to him. But before I introduce him, I want to let everyone know that the next Science, Religion, Lunch seminar will be on November 30th, again at noon. It'll feature Tony Flood, who is a professor in the NDSU Philosophy Ethics program, and he'll be talking about greed as an individual vice. And everybody, of course, is welcome to that. But today we have Tyler Waltz, who is one of my advisors. I said he's a natural resource management PhD student. He's going to be talking about the effectiveness of science communication and social media. He's one of our teaching assistants in the philosophy department, and he's an administrative assistant for the Northern Plains Ethics Institute. He'll have about 40 minutes to develop his ideas, and then of course ask questions. He can take, if you want to ask questions, please put things in the chat, and we'll keep track of that as we go along. So, Mr. Waltz, it is now your forum.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Dennis, for the kind introduction. Let me get my PowerPoint up and ready here. So today's topic is like, subscribe, share, the effectiveness of science communication. And our last speaker, Dr. Kent Rogers, talked a lot about scientific inquiry and its methods in doing so. Today, we're going to talk less about science and how to effectively communicate science instead. Okay, I hope everyone can see that okay. I hope I'm coming in clearly. Today's objectives for science communication and its effectiveness on social media, we are going to discuss basically what it is, why we care, and what are the benefits or detriments with social media. I'm also going to demonstrate the core things an effective science communicator must have. And these are universal elements for any effective communicator, which many of you, if you're a teacher, may have employed a few of these in the classroom with your students. And next, I want to describe just a little bit on the situation surrounding COVID-19 and its initial onset with the World Health Organization and the CDC guidance, and how it was communicated and understood by the public initially. And finally, with this presentation, I want to explore what a scientist looks like. I know that sounds kind of odd, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Big definition, what is science communication? Science communication is the process of distilling technical information about science-related topics into an understandable message and stories for public consumption. Science is, when communicating it, often interdisciplinary, so a lot of hard sciences, physical science, environmental science, and psychology behind all of these things. The purpose of a science communicator, I brought it down to kind of these four key elements. You want to inform, engage, educate, and inspire. The primary goal of a science communicator is to inform the public about science. Science is a process of figuring things out by venturing to ask questions and make those observations. This is done through the scientific method as we test things through experimentation. The effectiveness of science communication on social media is seen by its ability to reach large audience and to engage with them. There is a dialogue established often with people by engaging with the content that is distributed or posted, and this is done by clicking, liking, commenting, sharing, all of those things. And educating. The primary goal is to educate, not to take a side, typically to avoid politics, and never to engage when there are insults and things like that. These are teachable moments. Policymakers are the ones who decide what to do next with the science that is proposed and demonstrated to the public. It is best to educate and inform, though there is no reason why this can't be fun and entertaining. Science is fun, and scientists enjoy discussing their work. And lastly, inspire. There are new generations of scientists all the time, and I think a big portion of science communication is getting kids and youth inspired by science, engaging with it, and seeing it as an accessible option that they can see a role there for themselves. So this is going to be reforming what a scientist looks like by promoting inclusion and diversity within various fields of science. Okay, this next slide is sort of the key elements of effective communicators. By no means are these in any order, but I'll go through them as such, beginning with audience all the way down to don't feed the trolls, and that's good there. That's there for good reason. We'll talk about that later. Okay, our audience. Speaking to scientists, policymakers, and the general public are all different. In the United States, there appears to be a fractured sense of respect for the scientific community. On the one hand, there is a great love and wonder and admiration for the sciences, their various crafts and disciplines, but then there's also a large community that has a significant, let's say, mistrust for science. Unlike a healthy dose of, say, skepticism, where we're genuinely asking questions and thinking critically, this is often rooted in disinformation, conspiracy theories, or touches of pseudoscience. And here there appears to be a purposeful intent to discredit scientists and experts. And this seems to be something that has been ongoing in anti-science or anti-intellectualism in America. And I think many of us can point to two books by Carl Sagan, The Dragons of Eden and A Demon Haunted World, where he really talks about this movement that's been happening since the 70s. And now I think this is especially prevalent, as I mentioned, in the climate we have today with the pandemic for COVID-19. There's a general lack of understanding in science, and we see misinformation as well. So how do we navigate this, and how do we be clear and factual when addressing our audience? Well, first off, we need to understand that the audience that we're speaking to may have different backgrounds, as well as scientists or the general public that knows very little of science. There's generally a difference in the fundamentals of science, and it's usually not the best. Here we need to be careful to speak in a manner that everyone understands the message. And this usually means avoiding technical jargon. Often for scientists, this is discussing their methods and data. So here it is also important to note that some groups, especially minority groups, this is as an aside to this, have very good reasons for being mistrustful of science. This is not that they do not like science or have respect for it. It's just there have been experiments done in the past to certain minority groups that have violated their autonomy or their consent. And understandably, these are significant issues to be distrustful to science. Here, the message to the audience should be concise and data-driven and easily understood when we talk to all of these groups. Another important factor is to accept that what you say is going to be challenged, and it is okay to be wrong. Okay, so explaining the data, I have this graphic here, kind of shows a refined version of how science tends to go to the general public. The public tends to be interested in new scientific data, new studies as they come out. And often these studies may be behind a paywall or are inaccessible or just don't make sense if someone doesn't have the training. So accessibility and emotionality in science education and communication is demonstrated by this graph. We can sort of start at the top where a scientist and the academic community are working on publishing their findings. It's usually bogged down in heavy jargon. We see science throughout this, and the kind of purple section here is roughly staying the same, even to the end point there. So science is comprised of aspects of the methods, jargon, and usually has highly specialized codes to communicate that science to the peers. What we want to do is refine it down, and that's where graphic design comes in, where we can have tables, figures, graphics that better explain to the public what exactly is going on. Through media and education, these this is where science communicators come in, as well as news stations or local news describing reports that are coming out. And we see with the fine arts at the end here, is trying to achieve more of a emotional impact. I know that sounds sort of a negative or odd thing to say, but it's getting that excitement or engagement to have people first look at the article and click on it if it's on social media, and then actively reading it, engaging with people, and having a civil dialogue as well. And all the way to the end here, we see the massive outreach and the public. So science has largely remained the same. That jargon has really been refined to very little technical speak, and then it is much more accessible for the common layperson. So another important thing, probably one of the most important things for a science communicator, is being authentic with your audience. You want to be straightforward and approachable for people to ask questions and feel safe to do that. So even as an expert, a science communicator must build rapport with their audience. This requires trust, which is usually best achieved by being knowledgeable, being authentic with your audience, and being okay with being wrong. We have to accept that we don't have all the answers, and conveying that to the audience is actually likely to make them feel more connected to you. They're going to see you as someone that is a human being that makes mistakes, but is also a credible expert to talk about to these things. And doing so fulfills an important role between the science community and the general public. So simply, if you don't know, you don't know, and that is perfectly fine not to have all the answers. Overall, this is where one's passion for science and sharing with others kicks in. Have evidence at the ready and ensure the message is clear for others, even if that evidence is not what you would like it to be. It should be neutral and not cherry-picked as you describe scientific evidence. Next up, we have establishing your credibility as an expert. So for many people that have been doing research for decades, they tend to narrow in on a particular thing. So when you're talking to, say, a kid or just the general public, you often have a 2-minute window to provide everything that you do, keep their attention and keep them interested, keep them asking questions. And it is often hard to refine everything that you do in your career down to a 2-minute window. So science communicators therefore must be well-read and knowledgeable in various topics of the field, because they are going to be the figureheads of science often. They're going to get a variety of questions, and they may have a background in, say, epidemiology, studying a particular disease, and they're going to be asked questions about microbiology, concerning something entirely different, or they could be asked about water cycles, something like that, that is a little bit different than their field, but they're going to be the reliable experts to convey a message. So the main point here is establish your credibility. They put in the work and research. They may not have all the answers, but they're going to be that spokesperson to deliver the information with little jargon as possible. Next up, we have simply promoting other people's work. Science tends to be male dominated, and a lot of the fields today are certainly male dominated, and women especially may feel like they don't belong, or why even try when it's such a male dominated field. So this comes down to simply being inclusive. And this tends to be a issue with STEM in that it's a difficult path to navigate, especially for, as I mentioned, minorities such as women or persons of color that do not have the same access. What we should recognize is science is for everyone. Kids and youth tend to ask a myriad of questions about the universe. They're excited and they're engaged. This spark for wonder is important, and it is important for science communicators to make science accessible to youth especially, but the general public. People tend to envision themselves in roles that they see. So a lot of people's views of scientists are what they see sometimes in the media, but oftentimes in film, TV shows, comic books, different types of media. And there tends to be a stereotype of what scientists look like. So when kids see a particular view or role of this person, they may not be able to identify with it. So kids that see a person that looks like them makes it more likely that, hey, I can join this discipline, or I can engage with something I like because this is definitely a path I can see myself in. Next up, just social media is the kind of delivery device. So this comes down to social media being the main platform that science communicators, or SciComm, are going to engage with the general public. And each one has its benefits. I think we can all think of detriments with social media, but let's look at the positives for different tools of outlets. So Twitter, this is primarily useful for stating one's credential and their bio, as well as a website to a page. And here people can post a lot of information quickly. It's actually one of the quickest ways to relay social media. Facebook, here we have, I think many people are familiar with these first two. Facebook is good for posting photos and connecting with other people, but it can be heavily damaging as it's has received a lot of backlash for censorship and things like that. Instagram tends to be a site for simply photos. Here people can post photos of what they do in the field, different things they're doing in the lab. And this really gets people engaged in science because these images are often visually pleasing. It shows gratifying work of field work and kind of helps set the tone of what science can be for some people. And TikTok is another one I'll mention. I don't know how many people are familiar with TikTok. Like these other ones, you're usually on your phone or similar device scrolling through. TikTok is, think of it as a shortened version of YouTube, where you can add in music and customize it and so forth. TikTok is heavily used out of all of these by the younger generations of kids that we will be seeing coming into careers. A lot of them communicate via TikTok. So science communicators are sort of gravitating towards this social media device in order to engage effectively with kids and other people. Next up, I mentioned don't feed the trolls. We know social media can be a very ugly place, as the internet itself can be a very ugly place. People can hide behind, really anything they want and say what they want. If the person is not there physically, let me say that again. Talking to people online is very different than in person. You may say things that you would never say online rather than in person, and it can be pretty brutal and nasty. It's often a good rule of thumb to avoid the comment section, but as a science communicator, this is where one needs to go, because this is where the questions are asked. This is where the comments are posted. This is where people are engaging with the post that is displayed. Dennis Cooley had a excellent presentation, I think around this year or this time last year, talking about experts in the field. And I think he mentioned it can be fun dropping bombs, but that's not the adult thing to do. We want to engage with our audience in a mature and professional manner. Sarcasm is often a detriment, and it does not do anything. It's not a useful tool in your tool belt to teach. Instead, we want to provide teachable moments if it's something that should be done. Sometimes these things are best left avoided, or blocking the nasty things that happen in these communities and getting rid of them. But other times people say something that just comes out wrong, and we want to use these as teachable moments rather than seeking to humiliate them or put them down. So here in the comments section, we review lots of things like sexist comments, racist comments, things like that. And these really dampen the mood of science communicators. To be an effective communicator, you're using social media, and this can be emotionally exhausting. But it is best to remain accessible to those that want to learn and remain professional in these situations. Another one here is simply listening to your audience. That will be the last one for effective elements for science communicators. Essentially, you want to create a two-way dialogue, be open to questions, note people's concerns or fears of science, as there is a lot of misinformation or disinformation out there. And while science is often rooted in bureaucracy and politics, it is best to not take sides or engage in politics, as this kind of destroys one's credibility or neutral ground of being a figure that's an expert. Here, science is the goal and the communicator is simply the messenger. So science communication and social media. I'm talking about effectiveness today, and we'll see why social media is so effective as an outlet. Every second, more than 7,000 tweets are sent on Twitter. That is a whole lot of content coming out every single day. And I think many of us spend a great deal of time on our devices, particularly on social media. If you have a handheld cell phone, you can click on settings, go to your battery, and you can see exactly where you are spending your time on your device, hourly or weekly. For many people, that is social media, and Facebook, Twitter being significant portions of that. This is readily available at our fingertips, and science is a good option for communication because many realms within it are visually pleasing. So many people think of Neil deGrasse Tyson, other astrophysicists that are bringing just these great realms of the universe and talking about them, often with a lot of photography or visual aids that get people awe-inspired. And some of these communicators have somewhere of like 5 million followers. So these are almost become celebrities at this point, where they have a large following of people listening to what they're saying and following them for guidance for new scientific information. For instance, the impact of science communication is best demonstrated by what happened in 2015. The New Horizons spacecraft flew by Pluto. It was the first view of the up-close surface view of Pluto, and it was posted to Instagram. It received 142,000 likes and almost 400,000 interactions by either clicking it or sharing it. And on Twitter, it reached about 39 million people and 30 million people on Facebook. So social media provides a great outlet to communicate with the general public. So getting into a bit of the psychology behind social media, just asking the question, how predictable are we? And we'll talk about some things known as machine learning and psychometrics. So one thing I often hear people talk about is they may be discussing with a friend, hey, I was talking about having ice cream with a friend, and suddenly I went to my phone later and I'm getting all these ads for ice cream. What the heck is going on? Is my phone listening to me? Do I need to be concerned with these types of things? Do I need to adjust my settings? Well, it turns out that for social media and the different applications we use, our phone is not actually recording or listening into what we're saying in our conversations. We are actually just very easily understood and become predictable. The different things that you look at, or the acceptance of cookies on computers, makes your data there and easily logged in. And it makes it through social media companies, they are essentially data mining your information. You are essentially the product in this point. So machine learning and psychometrics. Machine learning produces insights into audience behavior. This is how we become predictable. Social media effectiveness comes down to understanding the value of machine learning and its ability to kind of uncover patterns of data. This is best seen by examples of how people like something, retweet it, share it. We can see all those metrics and data and see how often people engage weekly. Another component for this is supervised learning. And this is looking at contextual data, such as the amount of followers someone has, or content base, such as putting a hashtag for astrophysics and then seeing all these things for related to astronomy or physics or all sorts of things in that category. With these two, they provide us with high informational value. So these are things that may be controversial, negative consequences, or relevance. These are affected by how the audience engages with these, and it influences their behavior, such as the likelihood that they're going to click on a scientific article that was posted on social media. In terms of science communication, there are topics that are more communicative, social, and positive, and these tend to foster a two-way relationship to have more of a conversation. And when that happens, people are more likely to engage, they're more likely to reply to something and share that article, whatever it may be, to kind of promote the person's work as well. So let's talk a little bit about science communication and COVID-19. As we know, science builds upon itself, and when there's new data presented, that science may have a different message. So COVID-19 concerns risk communication in both hazards and outrage. In the pandemic, this is known as crisis communication. So for the public, there are factors that they concern regarding risk perception, and the public does not respond well to scientific reasons or scientific reasoning when they have fears or concerns about something that's scary, that's unknown, that's unpredictable. So this leads to more emotional responses or outrage at the acceptability of preventive measures, such as typical mandates such as masking up, wearing a face mask, face covering, as well as social distancing. Here, crisis prevention is used to reduce anxieties and fears while adhering to medical strategies. So problems of gravitating to a phrase or latching on to something by the media is social distancing. Social distancing, excuse me, states that we should remain 6 feet apart, and yep, got it. 6 feet apart. I now have this sort of security blanket, safety blanket. If I stay 6 feet apart or 6 feet and 1 inch, I am good. And this is what we've often seen at the early onset of the pandemic is people gravitate to a key element that is repeated by media outlets or through different communities, that if they adhere to this social distancing of 6 feet, that they are going to be just fine. When in fact, we have to look at the whole conversation that's being had and the guidance. You also need to wear a mask, as this can help reduce the number of droplets that are spread, as well as it doesn't really matter if you're social distancing, if everyone is congregating together in a large group and it being indoors. So these are some considerations that with the CDC or the World Health Organization have stated, but the guidance has become unclear. And then as new information is understood and relayed to the public, there tends to be frustration, and people really don't like adhering to things that restrict their daily affairs. Okay, so here's a kind of a demonstration of hazard and risks. So knowing the audience and their fears, providing facts about the disease. And here I just want to touch on, again, the early guidance of the CDC and World Health Organization. And the important thing to know is while there are science communicators and experts out there relaying this information, social media provides both the expert and just your common person an equal platform to really say whatever a person wants. And this leads to significant issues. Expert strategies, what are experts doing to mitigate risks? How and basically who, how, and why. I mentioned the social distancing. Another consideration that we often don't think about is consider being on an airplane. Everyone has their masks on. They may be socially distanced, but as soon as that snack cart comes around, everyone takes off their masks at the same time. They're eating, they're talking, they're coughing. And here we have an instance where, yes, the guidance is good. Everyone's spaced apart and wearing a face covering. They may or may not be vaccinated, but now we have everyone taking off their mask at the same time, when what we would like to see is kind of intervals when these are taking place to kind of minimize that risk. And so this chart kind of explains how to best communicate this information to the public, both pre-crisis and during the crisis. And because people mistrust science and new information, it leads to mistrust of major organizations. Social media allows experts here to address safety measures, as well as the opportunity to counter these fears or counter misinformation that is out there. Okay, so science and social media. Kind of the main topics that have always been left to scientists have been climate change and vaccinations, and scientists have usually had or enjoyed the autonomy of just being trusted and having their expertise really well respected. Today, there's been little research on social media's ability for sharing and engaging with science. Science used to be treated with the autonomy, while its experts were provided public respect and legitimacy, as I explained. This seems to have changed as many government officials seek to discredit science or scientists, and even publicly assassinate their character in order to achieve their political ends or means. And without public support, science falters. And it falters because you lose diversity in that people, new scientists, don't want to join something that is not given the proper respect. And another major concern is if science is not trusted, it is not funded as well. And if people have a kind of poor understanding about the fundamentals of science, it's not likely going to get better. Instead, we need to have education on what science is and does. And science tends to engage with public, basically with something known as a deficit model. This is just assuming that the public has a deficiency in the fundamentals of science, but this was kind of used up until the point of science journalism, but it really did not engage with the public that well. It was a better outlet, but it didn't really do much for engaging with the audience. Here, social media allows people to become active participants and real stakeholders in science. Say that again. We want people to become educated, to feel valued, and become stakeholders in the process, because science is funded by the public. And here, public engagement involves public communication. So this is conveying information. This may be public consultation or public participation in various forms of social media. So talking about the youth, effective communication depends on engaging and educating the public, but I think a lot of it is going to come down to really talking to the youth, because they're the ones that primarily use social media for practically anything. And you can kind of see this by this table I've added on here. Youth tends to use social media for science and current affairs. When I looked at a Pew Research Center, say that again, a Pew Research Center article, it demonstrated that 98% of US adults use the internet. I think it was about 88% use social media, and they're more likely to get their information off the internet rather than typical usual traditional sources like local news, local radio stations and other outlets on TV. So the questions were, to what extent do adults use the internet for science and research content? And how do they engage with it? And how do they go about sharing it? So if you kind of look at this, we have our column for science research. Current affairs is up there high. I think a notable one is when we look at shared links. If you look at the email portion, very little is sent when it comes to different information on social media. Most people share content through social media rather than simply emails. And kind of gives a breakdown of how often people engage with these different things. And so for younger generations, a lot of us, myself included, I'll say, look to just the internet in general. So Google Scholar for information. We may pay for a subscription to a newspaper, and we do that more online. And a lot of people also gravitate towards social media because it is simply a matter of convenience. And a lot of people follow what they feel are reliable figures on a daily basis. So the final thing I really want to touch on, and a key thing I want everyone to take away, is kind of reintroducing and describing what a scientist looks like. And I know that sounds like a silly statement, but it is meant to change the perception of science in creating diversity and the presence of inclusion. So that means talking to youth and having, through different forms of social media, people can see that scientists are more than just a lab coat or a old person doing odd experiments in the lab, right? We have these kind of generalized views from media through TV, comic books, and so on, like I mentioned, that scientists are human beings. They get things wrong. They have all these different interests that they enjoy doing when they're not doing science 24/7 in the lab. These are real people. And providing more role models that look like them, such as women or the LGBTQ community, and as well as the Black community, seeing these people on the stage as scientists doing good work, promoting other people, is exciting and essential for involving children. And I have two main things I want to talk about quick. Podcasts generally are not considered social media, but they often link to things such as Twitter, as this one does. So This Podcast Will Kill You is consisting of Dr. Aaron Ullman Updike and Aaron Welsh. Both of these are doctors in their own right as they study epidemiology, but they also put together this fun, entertaining podcast talking about a new disease every week. They have experts on all the time. They're forthcoming, saying that they are not experts on this matter, but they are relaying the information to get people excited about science. They're providing their sources on things such as Goodreads, where people can find out all the research they did and go look at it for themselves. And a good touch is each episode is a pun named after the episode. So it may be something called a placebo-rita cocktail or a poor choices. So you get some fun things along with that too. The next one I want to talk about is something called ologies. And ologies' basic premise is asking smart people dumb questions, things that everyone may be thinking in the room, but you're too afraid to ask. Here, ologies allows just a myriad of experts in their own craft and discipline to talk about what they do in about an hour segment, really engage with the podcaster, who is Allie Ward here, and make science just approachable. It's witty, it's fun. It's not always safe for work, although there are edited versions where certain words are taken out. But really, it provides a platform for what these scientists do, who they are, and if you want to learn more about their information, they always have links to maybe their social media account if they have one. And finally, I want to talk about a program that is I Am a Scientist. Rather than clicking on the link, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. We're just going to play a quick clip here.
Pretty much Albert Einstein. That's pretty much the only one I can really remember.
I know Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton.
Doc Ock from Spider-Man.
Dexter, Jimmy Neutron.
Would Doctor Who count? I don't know.
We always watch in science Bill Nye the Science Guy.
I think that a lot of us have gone on to Google search images, and the first thing that comes up when you search for a scientist is a caricature of an old white man with maybe tufts of white hair on the side and glasses falling off of his nose.
All of the scientists that they named fit a very specific mold that Hollywood and history books and television shows and comics all tend to mirror. Role models matter. Whether or not you see people that you can connect with, doing a particular thing matters.
I think there tends to be this two-dimensional flat view of what a scientist is. I think we tend to, again, be stereotyped into a group that's dull and boring and out of touch with society. I think we are not portrayed as who we really are.
It's very difficult for children and for anyone to imagine ourselves in a position where we can't see anything about that position that we could relate to.
Okay, so I'm going to actually end it there. I just want to end with my references here. I understand I've exceeded my time a little bit, and I want to get to you, to anyone that has questions about this. The main takeaway is just providing more inclusivity to science, and this really is influenced by effective communication on social media, by getting the general public to become engaged. And with that, I will end it here, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. So the floor is now open to questions. And to help folks get the prime the pump, I already put one in. So I'm going to ask this one. My question was, is a science communicator more of a teacher than a journalist?
So from what I've seen, different science communicators, I think they are more of a teacher than a journalist. They often are rooted in a particular craft. So I know one, for instance, is Susanna Harris, and she's studied viruses and she's an epidemiologist. She really enjoyed her background and doing science, but didn't like some of the aspects of science and didn't really feel that gratifying experience that usually a teacher does when they can engage with the classroom, educate people, and have more of an interaction in doing so. So I think science communicators tend to be more teachers, but not all science communicators, or I should say not all scientists, are very good at communicating. Science communication is sort of a new discipline. Yes, the science communicator may have a communications background versus science, but a lot of these communicators tend to be an expert, hold a PhD within some aspect of science, and they may be converting their role into becoming an effective communicator rather than simply a journalist who's conveying information to the public. They may not be, or probably not, an expert on the particular thing in science.
Other questions? I've got another one. I want to encourage people to ask questions, so this is your opportunity. You can either put it in the chat or you could just unmute yourself and ask the question. So somebody looking at your presentation might say it's interesting, but you're very optimistic that there are a number of folks who aren't going to respond well to you no matter what, because they just don't believe you. If you're talking social media, we're seeing that the algorithms, whatever it is that you like, has been recorded by Facebook and the other ones. And so what happens is you're funneled into a particular viewpoint more and more. And so it doesn't matter how good of a communicator you are, they're just they're going to listen to things that already agree with their biases. How would you respond to that?
No, I think that's true. And I think we see that anywhere where we have, say, sexism or racism. The people that you're talking to, you're trying to make people more proactive in promoting other people and discouraging these types of things. So yes, there's going to be people that are very much against what a speaker is saying or against the science. And I think that kind of comes down to a cultural aspect. One of the big downfalls of science communication is that it looks at science from a Western lens. When you have other groups talking about science, they want to know more about language. Here we're predominantly using language, and that can keep some people out, as well as I think another downfall is time constraints. Not science communicators are, as you kind of mentioned, all these things are funneled towards a science communicator, but they can't address each and everything. So some people may feel left out, and it's just not practical for science communicator to address every issue.
Well, thinking about that, it sounds almost as if the only problem with making everyone understand is if you can make everyone understand if you just find the right language. Is that true? A lot of science is that you just can't do that. If you try to take it out of its language, you're misrepresenting what it is. So some things are relatively easy to understand if it's Newtonian physics or something like that. But when you're getting into hard stuff of quantum mechanics, that is not stuff that can be made simple, although, you know, some of the relativity stuff would be okay. But so the quantum stuff gets into spooky things that are just hard to describe. So how would do you think every scientific thing can be explained in simple language?
No, and I think you're exactly right. So I know for cosmetologists, they are essentially looking at the universe, and when they're talking to their colleagues, they are, or cosmologists, when they're talking to their colleagues, they're talking in a very specific thing, dealing with equations and data sets. And that is not how they're going to talk to the public. They're going to talk about where did the universe come from? What is the importance of this star system? What is dark matter, if we can talk about it to the general public? So there's certain things that when people are talking to their colleagues, they're talking in much more technical language, and it just becomes removed. So you have different types of conversations, and usually science communication can attempt to answer these things if they have specific questions, but it's usually a general form to get people engaged or to post something that NASA is doing, something like that. Or in today's pandemic, simply relaying new health information.
Enrico has one in chat. So Enrico, do you want to just say this?
I was curious about the role entertainment plays, because communication is one thing, but and obviously scientists have to improve in the way they communicate. That's always been so, and all the more so now that you've got all these different audiences. But it seems a lot of people go online and are expecting to be entertained, and you have to capture attention by entertaining. And if you're trying to educate and at the same time entertain, I'm just curious. It seems to me that it's difficult. You end up getting stuck, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the entertainment component.
Right. So I can see that as a major pitfall. So think of some sites such as TikTok, where people may use it as an outlet, but people become so engaged in providing new content for engaging with an audience. People will do many things to essentially get a like, that they're ignoring essential things that could be talked about instead. I know one person she calls herself Raven the Science Maven, is a doctor, and she basically uses her platform to talk to people on TikTok, makes, say, catchy videos with rhythm to talk about basic things in microbiology. On the other flip side, I mentioned Susanna Harris is more interested in talking to your typical scientists that are not science communicators, that don't have that background, that aren't really engaging with the public other than posting new research, and is talking to these groups of people. And like I mentioned, that 2-minute window to explain something. You have about 2 minutes to capture a kid's attention or someone in the general public and make everything you've done make sense to this person. It's usually about, yes, you're entertaining people, and that's fine. I think Instagram is fine for posting photos, but it doesn't always show what people actually do. Field research can be very fun, but a lot of the work is done in a lab and looking at the data, doing coding and doing a lot of things that are really not that fun. But the essential takeaway is, yes, you need to entertain your audience a little bit, but you need to show the realities of that the scientist is basically doing all these things behind the scenes, that they're a real person, and it's someone that, you know, can be relatable to.
I want to push that really good question. Make me start thinking about, are we being unfair to scientists? So the standard is, not only do they have to be really good in their work in science, but they have to be good at entertaining. They have to be good at explaining, at teaching, all of these different things. We don't ask accountants to do this. We don't ask business managers, lawyers, any of these different folks to do this sort of thing. So is there a double standard? And if not, why is there a difference between these other incredibly important professions and scientists?
Yeah, I do see that as a valid point. I guess you have that double-edged sword where there's a mistrust for science. You need to effectively communicate it. And these are the tools that a person can use, whether it is simply learning how to talk to an audience, not necessarily via social media, but talking to an audience and conveying information. And then you also have social media as a platform that you don't want. You may have excellent scientists that have no presence on social media, as you're saying. They have no desire to do so, and they're performing great work, fine science. And then you can kind of have people that morph into celebrity science communicators, such as Neil deGrasse Tyson, that almost become godlike to their followers, and that can become kind of a detriment. So I think it is, yes, it's unfair to expect all of these major roles of scientists, but I think it doesn't hurt to have a basic tool set of effectively communicating to your audience, to have the technical jargon in your research and the papers that you publish in journals online, as well as being able to then take that data, synthesize it, and then talk to the general public about what you've done in a different language. I think that makes it more accessible, because science is funded by taxpayers and you want it to become available for the public. And oftentimes it costs a lot of money to read these journals, and understand the journals is a different thing too.
Well, but again, I would say, you know, a lot of things cost a lot of money. It costs us, for engineers, for example. I think some of the science folks might be upset by engineers being lumped in as science. They usually say those are two different things. But they're doing incredibly complicated things, and they might not be required. I think what you can do is, in my field, if you find an issue, you always try to suggest a solution to it. So not all scientists have to do this. Those who can't shouldn't attempt it, because they'll just make things worse. But those who can should be the spokespeople. And these are the requirements. This is what you have to look for. Can you do this and do it well? If you can't, do what you do well, which might be the research. And they might not, as I said, I doubt if some things can be made understandable, because some of this stuff is really, really hard. It isn't going to translate well unless somebody has done a lot of work in the field. Chaos theory is sort of, you could get an overview of what it is. Can the wings of a butterfly cause a hurricane? Yeah, if the system's chaotic enough. That's as far as I can go. So I can't use it. I can't do the calculation. I can't do anything. So I think that might be the approach to take. Are there any other questions, by the way? If not, I'm going to put an end to this incredibly interesting session. You took really good questions, Mr. Waltz, and gave good responses. I would, if you could, send out the links so people can look at those podcasts and so on. And that would be a very good thing. Everyone's invited to 2 weeks from today, Tony Flood's work. And then on December 14th, if you mark this, we're going to have the director of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library give a talk on creating that library in a sustainable way. Also talking about the ethical issues associated with that, and plus the indigenous people issues that they've had to deal with. So you're all invited. That's December 14th at this time. So everybody have a wonderful time. Remember, we just started winter, so be careful out there. I'll see y'all later.